Good Friday to you. Hope your weekend is off to a great start. Thanks for joining the Weekend Winners Edition. I'm Dave Bacon. We are going to talk plenty of Browns with Ellis Williams, Browns beat reporter here on cleveland.com, as well as in the pages of the Plain Dealer. Pro Football Focus came up with their top 101 performances from this season, and the Browns were all over it. Let's take a look as Wyatt Teller, one of the offensive guards, comes in at number 18. Garrett and Mayfield, Baker Mayfield, 45th best individual performance in the NFL 2020, according to Pro Football Focus. You also see Jarvis Landry and 4 of the Browns' 5 offensive linemen. Only Jedrick Wills, the rookie left tackle, not in the top 101 performances in the NFL, according to Pro Football Focus. Let's welcome in Ellis Williams. And Ellis, when you look at that, you surprised that the Browns graded out so highly by the analytics-driven Pro Football Focus?
You nailed it. I'm not. And from the start of this regime, Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry, there's been a real correlation between what Pro Football Focus does and where the Browns front office aligns. We saw it in the draft. They targeted a lot of their players graded out well, according to Pro Football Focus. And this continues to stay on brand. You know, it's really impressive. The Browns have 7 players in the top 80, 4 in the top 46, Wyatt Teller being the highest of those, as the list just showed, Baker Mayfield coming in at 45. These lists are always both challenging, fun, and a sign of the time of year we're in. And Pro Football Focus does a good job of just staying true to their database and their numbers. I don't think fans should react too much. Like, they're not saying Myles Garrett isn't a better football player than Wyatt Teller. It's just the specific season that was, and Wyatt Teller deserves every bit of his 18th overall ranking. And the Browns really have are represented well on this list because of the areas in which they played well this season. It makes sense having 3 offensive linemen on that list, and then Myles Garrett, and of course Baker Mayfield, like I said, coming at 45. I thought Jack Conklin was a little too low at 62, first team All-Pro. But again, that's the type of stuff where Pro Football Focus sometimes differentiates from what the media thinks and what our eye test tells us sometimes. But again, I think Conklin could have been higher. But it's like, the Bengals and Jesse Bates, he's one of the best safeties in football, and was impressive on this list, and he didn't have a Pro Bowl vote or make an All-Pro team. So Pro Football Focus continues to crank out great work, and this list has a lot of Browns on it for a good reason.
When you look at Baker Mayfield, is that a sign of how well he played that he is checking in at 45th on that list? Those are, again, individual performances for 2020, and he's 45th. That's the sign of a guy that if I'd have told you that at the beginning of the year, you probably would have laughed at me if I would have said that.
Yeah, well, depending who you would have asked, some of us had a feeling Baker would throw in the 20 to 30 touchdown range and have single-digit interceptions playing in this offense, and just knowing Baker's skill set and Kevin Stefanski's ability to unlock a player like that. But Baker's deserving of all of it. I've said it on this show before that we cannot give Kevin Stefanski in this system too much credit. And coming from someone like me who does praise Kevin Stefanski, Bill Callahan, Alex Empelt a lot, Baker deserves a lot of praise for taking this system, being a sponge, soaking up all the nuances of what Kevin Stefanski asked. Pre-snap, it was a lot to take in. I think post-snap, you do all your work pre-snap, so post-snap it's a lot easier. And that staff asked Baker to do a lot of things he hasn't done for really his entire football career. Going back to Oklahoma, being in shotgun, running RPOs, that wasn't this team this year. Of course, he wasn't empty a fair amount, but that's literally not RPO because there's no running back next to you. So Baker had a remarkable season. It's going to be fascinating to see how he builds upon it, if this 45 mark is the highest he ever ranks as a Brown, or if he still has some places to climb. That's what Browns fans are waiting to find out, and how the Browns go from now a team that is being taken seriously to now how quickly the expectations change. Now we're talking AFC Championship and Super Bowl stuff with the Browns, when just a year ago people were hoping for a winning record.
Now you look at that, only one defensive player on that. So the obvious question is, where do the Browns target to get better? Pro Football Focus has put out their top 50 free agents and likely landing spots, and the Browns have landed 2 of them, and both on the defensive side of the ball. They have them signing Anthony Harris to a 4-year contract in the $50-60 million range. I know you know Anthony Harris. What do you like about him? What type of player is he? What do you think of Anthony Harris and the fit with what the Browns are looking for?
Yeah, the ties to Anthony Harris have been going back since Kevin Stefanski joined the Browns. Of course, he's the Minnesota Vikings safety. Really had one all-pro style year, would have been in 2019. He took a step back this past season as the whole Vikings secondary and specifically their defense in general really did. It makes sense. The fit makes sense. The Browns desperately need defensive backs. They desperately need safeties. Joe Woods has not been secretive about his desire to even play a 4-1-6 style defense with 6 defensive backs on the field. He wants to be in sub packages. He wants to be in dime. That's the way the league is trending. But when you need 6, 7, 8 defensive backs and you can really only name about 2 safeties and 1 corner you feel sure about on this team right now, the Browns should be in market for any safety above replacement level right now, and Anthony Harris is, of course, that. This is going to go back to a team-building philosophy. I've been saying it on our Orange and Brown Talk podcast. I've said it on here with you before. Are the Browns going to be a team that spends in free agency like they did a year ago with guys like Austin Hooper and Jack Conklin, or are they going to be more the team that builds for the draft like they did a year ago with all the rookies that contributed to this team, Jedrick Wills, Harrison Bryant, and so on, and sign marginal free agent talent? Anthony Harris isn't a marginal free agent talent. Guys like B.J. Goodson are. I'm not sure yet. We don't have enough intel on how Andrew Berry wants to run this front office. Of course, with only having one offseason, Harris would make sense here, but I also just have a feeling, and looking at the roster makeup of how many players are going to need extensions, we're talking Baker Mayfield, Nick Chubb, Wyatt Teller, Denzel Ward, just to name a few. This roster is going to get expensive. And bringing in guys like Anthony Harris or someone we perhaps will talk about a little bit later, J.J. Watt, could signal some luxuries that would have to leave then. Sheldon Richardson makes about $12 million. Odell Beckham Jr. is due about $15 million. Jarvis Landry is $14 million. For one season, these players can all fit under a cap, but the longevity of a roster is what Andrew Berry's job is as a GM. So for that reason, I just keep going back to the fact that I think this organization is going to focus on building to the draft, drafting, 2 safeties and a corner this year and retaining their in-house talent. Ronnie Harrison, Grant Delpit, and a top 50 pick at safety would probably be just as effective as Harrison, Delpit, and paying big money for Anthony Harris. So I think this team builds for the draft, but we just don't know enough yet about Andrew Berry, and I can't be shocked if they do spend on someone like Anthony Harris come free agency.
Well, you mentioned J.J. Watt. He was granted his release last weekend from the Texans, and now there's some speculation that the Browns are in the mix. In fact, Pro Football Focus thinks the Browns will sign him to roughly, they're guesstimating, 2 years, $25 million. That would seem to be something I would see the Browns doing since they went after Jadeveon Clowney pretty hard a season ago. What are your thoughts on J.J. Watt to the Browns?
I love it. I wrote about it on cleveland.com this morning. I think schematically it's the best fit for J.J. Watt. My colleague Mary Kay Cabot on Tuesday broke down why, for every other reason, it makes sense. He's looking for a contender. He could play in the same division as his 2 brothers, Derek and TJ, in Pittsburgh, only be about 90 minutes to 2 hours away from them as well. And then on top of all that, as I said, schematically, I think it's the best fit. Teams like Pittsburgh and Green Bay run a 3-4 defense. J.J. Watt would perform fine in a 3-4 defense. I just think his best fit is a 4-3 as a standard, traditional, hand on the grass, 3-point stance defensive end. Having Myles Garrett on one side and him on the other would make teams, it'd be impossible to run away from either of them. They both are 2 of the best run defending defensive ends this game has ever seen. And then Myles Garrett, aside from Aaron Donald, is the most versatile defensive lineman in pro football, meaning you could put J.J. Watt at defensive tackle and Myles Garrett at the same side defensive end on the same side of the center, let's say on the left side of the center. So you have Garrett taking on a tackle, Watt taking on a guard or center. It would create a lot of issues having that much firepower, an overload essentially on one side of the football without overloading. It's 2 men instead of bringing 3 or 4, but those 2 guys can produce the production of 3 or 4 players. And you can do that vice versa. You can slide Myles Garrett inside, the younger, perhaps more willing player, and let the wily vet at 32 years old play on the outside. It would give Joe Woods exactly what I think he's trying to build: pressure with 4, play coverage on the back end, and it would be reminiscent of his 49ers days when he was the pass game coordinator there, and we all know the success they had with Nick Bosa and company getting off the quarterback and then letting their defensive backs make work. So I think J.J. Watt in Cleveland makes a heck of a lot of sense. I can't wait to see how this domino falls, and if I'm able to break down tape of J.J. Watt all offseason and into the training camp and the season, it'll be a blast.
The interesting thing is when you look at last year, Watt was double-teamed the most in the NFL, more so than any defensive end. Myles Garrett was 4th most. So think about putting the 2 of them, either separating them or putting them together. There's no way to double-team them. You're really running out of bodies.
It's exactly it, Dave. It's a math problem. And I'm a words guy, but the math is pretty simple there, right? You got 2 guys on one side and double-team rates through the roof with J.J. Watt and Myles Garrett. Not only were their double team rates both, I believe, 1 and 3 in the league according to ESPN, and sometimes some places have Garrett at 4, some have 2. Point is, the guy was doubled all the time, and Watt was a runaway with the most doubles, regardless of the metric you look at. But what's most impressive, aside from their double team rate, is their win rate when facing double teams. A guy like Zadarius Smith of the Green Bay Packers, who's a heck of a player, had a far lower win rate when doubled compared to J.J. Watt and Myles Garrett. So not only are you getting a guy who, and having 2 guys in Garrett and Watt who are used to facing double teams, they're used to beating double teams and winning there. So if you can't double them, and even when you do, they're going to beat you, I think the Browns' defensive line quickly would become one of the best in the AFC, if not all of football. And again, it goes back to why I think schematically, Cleveland's the best fit for J.J. Watt. And Mary Kay Cabot already broke down why everything else makes sense for him to join Cleveland as well.
Is there any concern? It's an analytics-driven front office. Analytics typically shies away from signing guys that are 30 years old. Watt's in that age range that you typically shy away from. How much do you think he has left? We've already talked about the double teams in that. He's a guy that has had some injury issues. How healthy is he, and what does he have left, do you think?
It's a great question, and this front office is going to run into a couple analytic questions and conflicts as this offseason wears on. You mentioned J.J. Watt. Paying Nick Chubb is going to be another question. We know what analytics say about paying a running back, but where analytics fall short, and this is no knock to anyone deep in the analytic game, and I think anyone at PFF would agree with you, is you have to also have an eye test that goes with it. And sometimes when you're dealing with future Hall of Fame talent, you can throw the numbers out the window because you're dealing with J.J. Watt and, again, Nick Chubb, 2 guys that are just exceptions to the rule of the average analytics stat that would tell you that this player's on the wrong side of 30 or this player plays an unimportant position in running back. J.J. Watt's played a complete season the past 2 years. He had troubles 3 and 4 years ago, playing single-digit games. Groin injuries, torn pectoral muscles. I get it. The list is long, but I wrote that both at the number that is being reported around 12, 13 million, maybe a little lower with a heavy incentive-laced contract, make it a relatively safe bet and also worth the risk. I mean, there's just not a defensive lineman on the market of J.J. Watt's caliber, resume, versatility, and schematic fit available in free agency. It's Watt, or the Browns are going to be looking for a lesser guy, a more expensive guy, or playing some inexperienced defensive end from the draft. Maybe they land in the first or second round. So I don't want to say it's Watt or bust, but I have a feeling that the Browns are going to regret missing out on him if he decides to go elsewhere, which is why I don't think the injury history is anything to shy away from. This is football. Guys play injured. Jadeveon Clowney would have taken $17 million from the Browns and played about 8 games. So could have been far worse. And I think Watt, a proven warrior, regardless of something catastrophic, like, Odell Beckham Jr. tore his ACL this year. These things happen. It doesn't mean they're injury prone. I think Watt's got 2 seasons of really good football still in front of him, and being able to play in a sparing and situational role here in Cleveland would do wonders for his career, regenerate him, and I think give him longevity that he wasn't having in Houston because he was playing too many snaps.
Let's put it this way. So we've already talked about how many of the Browns' offensive linemen were on Pro Football Focus's top 101 performances. That element of the Browns figures to be as good, maybe even better, just because they're younger. They'll have a year. I expect Jedrick Wills, now that he's used to playing left tackle, he'll, in theory, get a training camp to hone it. If you add J.J. Watt and Myles Garrett on the same defensive line, do the Browns arguably have the best offensive and defensive lines when you look at line play in the NFL, if they can do that?
It's trending that way, isn't it? I declared the Browns had the best defensive line in football back in November, and that's clearly stood true as Pro Football Focus released that for the first time in their recorded history, that the Browns recorded the best pass blocking and run blocking grade in their database. And then you add everyone you just named to the Browns defensive line, and things get pretty scary. I'm confident that most people watching this viewed the Super Bowl this year, and that was a great reminder that football, despite of all the fancy stuff you can have on the perimeter, is still one up front. You got to be able to protect and push guys in front of you on offense, and you need to be able to create pressure and disrupt gameplay and quarterback play on defense. It starts and ends there. And if the Browns are going to continue to invest in those two units, I think it's a great recipe for success. And again, it would be a very scary reality for offensive and defensive coordinators across the AFC.
Ellis Williams, Browns beat reporter here on cleveland.com, as well as in the pages of the Plain Dealer. We'll step aside, take a quick time out. On the other side of the break, we'll give you some names to think about as the Browns try to plug some of those roster openings that appear to be there for 2021. The Weekend Winners Edition will be right back. Stay with us.
Presque Isle Downs and Casino has sports betting. Use one of our 50 state-of-the-art BetAmerica kiosks to place your bet and watch your favorite games on one of our many HD televisions, or visit our sportsbook area. Only at Presque Isle Downs and Casino.
Do you like Ohio State football? Would you like to get information from me, Doug Lesmerises, about Ohio State football without having to look at my face? We have got the plan for you. Become an Ohio State text subscriber through cleveland.com. You send a text, 614-350-3315. What do you get? 2, 3, 4 texts right in your phone every day about Ohio State football. Inside information, polls, voting, all kinds of things. You can be on our podcast. We take text subscriber questions on our Buckeye Talk podcast every week. If you really want to be involved with Ohio State football, in season or out of season, become an Ohio State text subscriber from cleveland.com. Send a text to 614-350-3315. 14-day free trial. What do you have to lose? $3.99 a month after that. 614-350-3315. I'll see you in your phone.
Tri-C is here for you. Now more than ever, you need a post-secondary education. So I encourage you to start your journey here at Tri-C. The majority of fall classes will take place online, but we've added a variety of formats to meet your learning needs, and we've taken many steps to keep you safe on campus. Whether you're ready to get started or your four-year plans have changed, Tri-C is where futures begin.
The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program recognizes role model students and teachers from across Ohio. Nominations can now be done completely online. To nominate a deserving teacher or student, go to ohiolottery.com. In the About section, find Partners in Education. There you will find links to the nomination forms. Students kindergarten through 12th grade can be academic all-stars. Teachers can be honored as a Teacher of the Month. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education, where stars shine. The Weekend Winners edition continues. We continue to talk Browns football, and we're going to take a look at the roster and some spots that might be addressed either in free agency or the draft. Let's welcome back in Browns beat reporter Ellis Williams here on cleveland.com as well as in the page of the Plain Dealer. Ellis, let's start wide receiver. Wide receiver 3. So Rashard Higgins is a free agent. There are also a couple of other names to take a look at, Rashard Perriman and Brown as well. What are your thoughts? Who do you this is according to Pro Football Focus again. We're getting crazy with Pro Football Focus this weekend. Who do you like in that mix? Is there somebody else that you think might make sense as a fit as well?
So the issue with Rashard Higgins is the market he's going to command. Higgins had a sneaky, really efficient year, especially in the analytics crowd. Football Outsiders ranked him the number 3 receiver in all their database. And I realize, Pro Football Focus doesn't have him number 3, and no one in their right mind would say he's the 3rd best receiver in football. But it's definitely something. And that might make him a little too expensive to bring back, considering the $29 million they're already pouring into Odell Beckham Jr. and Jarvis Landry. But I do think that Higgins' best spot is to remain here in Cleveland. Does he go elsewhere and get the bag? You can't blame him for that. We're going to have to see how that turns out. But I think Higgins and Baker Mayfield have a repertoire that just isn't going to be replicable elsewhere for Higgins, which should keep him in Cleveland. As for Perriman, I don't see this team investing all that much in outside free agents, especially on offense. This team is going to draft a wide receiver. I doubt it's in the first round, because this is, like last year, one of the deepest wide receiver drafts in recent history. I think they can land a guy in round 3 or 4 that can come in and play sparingly. What this team needs is speed. It was obvious against the Chiefs that they just ran out of gas. The receivers could not get free in man coverage and enough to win. It's not like they were blanketed the whole game, but the Chiefs got the best of them playing physical in their face coverage. And there's a plethora of guys from rounds 3 to 5. I've been working on it this whole offseason that the Browns can target, and I think I don't want to say have immediate success, but we saw what Donovan Peoples-Jones was able to do as a rookie. And he's a guy that is going to make a gradual increase in production as well. I think they'd like to find someone twitchier and quicker in the slot to mirror Jarvis Landry's skill set, and really perhaps just a gadget guy. I think JoJo Natson would have had a role on this team in the playoffs, just to give them some spice, something to give the defense different looks. They're going to be looking for a dynamic playmaker like that, not a guy that can come in and dominate the snaps, but just provide wrinkles that keep defenses guessing and give Kevin Stefanski another option and something defensive coordinators need to plan for. Again, there's a long list of guys that the Browns can target, and I expect that they'll make that move somewhere between rounds 3 and 6 this year in the draft.
Do you think, let me go off the whole thing here, do you think that the Browns will listen to and potentially talk about trading Odell Beckham Jr.? It makes no sense. Part of his contract is guaranteed because of the injury. So salary cap casualty ain't going to happen for Odell Beckham Jr. Do you think they engage in some serious conversations about potentially trading him? And not from the standpoint that he's not valuable, that he's not good, that he's done, but just because, as you mentioned, they've tied up almost $30 million in wide receivers.
They've got to take the calls. They've got to listen, and I believe that they are. But here's the thing. If your goal is to get faster and more athletic on the perimeter and add playmakers to your roster, you're going backwards if you're dealing Odell Beckham Jr. You're not going to get a player in return of his caliber, his playmaking ability. Just turn on the Dallas Cowboy tape. That reverse really should go down as one of the best plays in recent Browns football history. It was just electric. He single-handedly won that game for them. And there's not a 3rd to 6th round talent in the NFL draft that can do something like that. Now, if they can get a first round pick for Odell and all of a sudden they're picking 2 players in the first round and they can add, anyone from Waddle to Rashard Bateman in these list of first round wide receivers, then now we're talking. Now I'm pretty intrigued. But if Odell commands, like a second and a third and maybe a player, I understand the depth. But now we're talking a change in the Browns window. You take a championship step back, getting rid of Odell Beckham Jr. and not at least getting a first-round pick back for him. I think Odell Beckham Jr. stays on this team. And selfishly, I just want to see if he can finally gel with Baker Mayfield now that this new Baker looks to be in complete control and command of the offense. And I think Odell would have made some critical plays for them down the stretch, and he was robbed of that because of his injury. The first 4 or 5 weeks in the next season are going to be really telling if Odell's on this team. And I'd be surprised if he isn't making impact plays immediately. But for the original question, I'm sure Andrew Berry's taking all those calls. It's his job to do his due diligence there. But if it's not a first coming back, then I don't think you can part with Odell Beckham.
Fair enough. Let's turn our attention to the defensive side of the ball. We've had some conversation. Edge rusher, and when you look at that, J.J. Watt, they also mentioned Rashard Weaver. Kind of in my mind, and we've alluded to this, it's kind of J.J. Watt and then everybody else.
Yeah, that's how it feels. I mean, if they miss out on Watt, they're going to have to go back to the drawing board and really figure out how they're going to address defensive end. Rashard Weaver is a great prospect out of Pitt. His teammate Patrick Jones is another interesting prospect. He measured out with some shorter arms than you would have liked, but you really can't go wrong with either of those two. There's some ties to Pitt and the Browns that I think could be interesting. Paris Ford's another safety there in Pitt that, of course, fits the Browns' needs. But Weaver specifically, there's a lot to like. What he isn't is a day one game changer. He's going to be a steady pro, but he's going to make those rookie mistakes. To me, it's water bust because you're going to be overpaying for a guy, like Carl Lawson or perhaps, and there's just not a guy of Watt's stature. And I'm not talking about his resume. I'm literally talking his size on the football field that you can plug in and play in a 3 technique or a wide 9. Watt's the only guy on this list that makes sense for me. And it's getting to the point where, as a film guy, it's going to be a bummer if the Browns don't land him because I just want to see what Myles Garrett and him playing next to each other would actually look like on a football field compared to fantasizing about it or having to try it out on Madden.
Let's move to linebacker. B.J. Goodson, Browns' current linebacker, is one of the names. And I'm not even going to try to say that last name, but who do you like there? Goodson, you alluded to, might be one of the free agents the Browns keep because it's probably a financial-friendly deal.
Yeah, so I wrote about what the Browns should do at linebacker about a week ago. I think bringing back B.J. Goodson at a fair number makes a lot of sense. I don't think he has a whole lot of leverage and interest in the market, and the Browns can say, look, we got your best season out of you by playing in our system. And he's a leader of the defense and was exposed in coverage plenty, but again, did enough to be a guy that should stick around. But I think the Browns need to target a linebacker at pick 26 in the 2021 draft. And I went as far as to label Zaven Collins as a guy out of Tulsa who makes a lot of sense there. I know was tied to the Browns early, and I wasn't interested in that right away. But after watching the Super Bowl, seeing what Levante David and Devin White did for that Tampa Bay defense, the way they were able to get their hands on Travis Kelce and then go sniff out screens and get in Patrick Mahomes' face and track him down on scrambles and play man spy, a mirror concept it's actually called. It opened my eyes that to compete against not just Patrick Mahomes, but Lamar Jackson, they need a do-it-all type of linebacker. And you turn on the tape, Zaven Collins checks out at 6'4", 260. He moves like a guy 30 or 40 pounds less his weight. And it's just really remarkable to see what he was able to do. He's versatile. You can play him on the edge. You can play him in the middle of the field. You can play him to the boundary. You can play him to the field. You can do anything with a guy like that. There's some other guys. Nick Bolton of Missouri makes sense. Jabril Cox is a long linebacker out of LSU. But for that first-round impact, I think it's Zaven Collins at 26. And I know we got a long ways to the draft, but I don't think there's going to be a whole lot that will change my mind on that.
Let's look at cornerback, another area that you ideally want somebody that can come in and play. And there's a couple of guys, Desmond King and Elijah Molden. Now, the other thing that I'll add in here is reports are today that the Cardinals are going to let Patrick Peterson walk. And then there's some talk that the Saints are in some major salary cap issues, and Marshawn Lattimore local kid, might be available by trade. Who do you like in that group, and what do you think the Browns might be thinking with those guys?
Yeah, and you can add Richard Sherman to that list of Twitter speculation, if you will. I think that's really as far as this is all gone. And Patrick Peterson makes sense, and Lattimore is a heck of a talent. But again, it goes back to what I said in the first segment. This is about a team-building philosophy. Are the Browns going to spend in free agency and be, a cap-stricken team like the Saints or the Los Angeles Rams, or are they going to build through the draft? And I just lean towards them trusting the regional scouts, trusting their in-house talent, and building that way. It's the cheaper way to do it. It builds longevity as long as you nail those picks. And they did a great job in their first time drafting, whether it's Desmond King, a guy like Asante Samuel Jr., I think they could land in the second round, perhaps moving up slightly to grab him. There's a lot of intriguing defensive backs in this draft that if you trust your coaching, first trust your scouting, of course, identify the talent, but then you trust your coaches in-house, a guy like Joe Woods, a career defensive back, a pro defensive back, a lifetime defensive back, to coach those guys up, pairing him with Greedy Williams, Denzel Ward, and just having a young guy to learn from those two guys who I guess are considered vets now but are still young themselves. I think there's a lot of foundation there that the Browns could shore up this secondary a lot quicker rather than bringing in any big name free agents.
And then we'll end with the safeties. And when we look at the safeties, Mooring and Will Parks are two that we named. Of course, we also talked about Anthony Harris early. Who are some guys to listen out for as well if the Browns go draft route with safeties?
Yeah, so Mooring is the first one that you hear a lot about, a guy that is near the top of the safety board. I think Javon Holland out of Oregon is another name to watch. And it's going to be a reaction, I think, situation for the Browns because safety in this draft is not a huge position of strength. And with the way the Browns play, I think they really already have their two main safeties. You're going to be able to play Ronnie Harrison and Grant Delpit in a split safety look or a single high with either of them. So they're going to prioritize more of the slot guy than just your traditional safety. So that really widens their net for solving this problem. We can't think of the Browns secondary as cornerback and safety. They're going to need versatile guys that can play both slot, the nickel, and roll as a safety. And I think there's corners that may be more talented and more suited than that rather than some of the safeties in this class. So it's going to be interesting to follow, but I think this team is going to lean on overdrafting and having a stockpile of cornerbacks rather than, prioritizing safety in one of their top 50 picks.
Ellis Williams, Browns beat reporter here on cleveland.com, as well as in the pages of the Plain Dealer. Always appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much, Ellis.
Thanks for having me, guys. Appreciate it.
All right, Ellis Williams, I'm sure we'll be checking in with Ellis as we continue to talk about free agency and the draft for the Cleveland Browns. That'll do it on this edition of Weekend Winners. Stay safe, everybody. We'll see you again next Friday. Have a great week.